The Return of Sherlock Holmes, 1905. Episode 1, The Adventure of the Empty House. Welcome back, fellow detectives. It's been 3 long years since we stood at the edge of Reichenbach Falls, watching in horror as Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty plunged into the churning abyss. 3 years of mourning the greatest detective who ever lived. 3 years of believing that the Napoleon of crime had claimed his ultimate victory. But what if I told you that death itself couldn't contain Sherlock Holmes? That the game was never truly over? Prepare yourself for one of the most shocking revelations in detective history, because tonight, the impossible becomes reality. Picture yourself in London, spring of 1894. You're walking alongside Dr. Watson through the darkening streets, both of you still carrying the weight of that terrible day in Switzerland. Watson has tried to move on. He's remarried, returned to his medical practice, attempting to fill the void left by his brilliant friend. But Holmes's absence haunts every corner of Baker Street, every unsolved mystery in the newspapers. The city feels different without him, doesn't it? Watson murmurs as you pass by 221B. The rooms above remain empty, preserved exactly as Holmes left them. A shrine to genius that will never return. Or so everyone believes. But London is about to be shaken by a murder so audacious, so calculated, that it demands the methods of Sherlock Holmes himself. The victim? The Honorable Ronald Adair, son of the Earl of Maynooth, shot dead in his locked second-floor room under impossible circumstances. No weapon found, all windows fastened from inside, door locked from within. How does one commit murder in a sealed room and vanish into thin air? Watson reads about the case in the evening papers with growing frustration. If only Holmes were here, he would have solved this riddle in an afternoon. The irony of that statement will soon become devastatingly clear. What Watson doesn't know, what you're about to discover, is that Holmes is here, watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal himself. Let me set the scene for you. Ronald Adair was found slumped over his writing desk at 10 p.m., a bullet through his head. On the desk lay a neat arrangement of coins and papers. He'd been calculating losses and gains from his whist games at several gentlemen's clubs. But here's what makes this murder truly baffling. The bullet came from a soft-nosed revolver, yet no gun was found in the room, and the only door was locked from inside with the key in Adair's pocket. Think about this carefully, detective. How could someone shoot a man in a locked room and escape without leaving a trace? What method could make this seemingly supernatural crime possible? Keep this puzzle in your mind as the story unfolds. Watson becomes obsessed with the case, visiting the crime scene on Park Lane, examining every detail as Holmes taught him. I walked around the house 3 times, studying the windows, the drainage pipes, any possible entry point. But it was hopeless. I'm no Sherlock Holmes, and I felt his absence more acutely than ever. On the 3rd day of his investigation, Watson collides with an elderly, deformed book collector on the street near Adair's house. The old man's armful of volumes scatters across the pavement, and Watson, ever the gentleman, helps gather them up. "Terribly sorry, sir," Watson apologizes. "I wasn't watching where I was going." The elderly collector waves away the apology with a gnarled hand. "No harm done, doctor. These old bones are tougher than they look." Something about that voice sends a strange shiver through Watson, but he dismisses it as imagination. How many times have you overlooked something obvious because you weren't expecting it? Watson returns to his practice, but that evening he receives an anonymous note. "Come to 221B Baker Street at 10 p.m. tonight if you wish to understand the Adair murder. Come alone and tell no one." The handwriting is unfamiliar, but something compels Watson to obey. Picture Watson climbing those familiar 17 steps to the old sitting room, his heart pounding with memories and grief. The door is unlocked, and inside, lit by a single candle, he sees a figure silhouetted against the window. The unmistakable profile of Sherlock Holmes, seemingly alive and studying some object with his magnifying glass. "Holmes!" Watson cries out, rushing forward. But as he reaches the figure, he realizes with crushing disappointment that it's merely a wax bust, positioned to cast Holmes's shadow on the blind. Someone's cruel joke? Or something more sinister? "Good evening, Watson," comes a voice from the shadows behind him, a voice Watson thought he'd never hear again. "I hope you'll forgive the theatrical staging, but I needed to demonstrate something important about the Adair case." Watson spins around and there, emerging from behind a bookcase, stands Sherlock Holmes. Alive, real, unmistakably present. For a moment, Watson's world tilts on its axis. Then, his medical training takes over, and he does what any sensible man would do when confronted with a ghost. He faints dead away. When Watson regains consciousness moments later, Holmes is kneeling beside him with a brandy glass. "My dear fellow, I had no idea my reappearance would affect you so strongly, though I suppose 3 years is rather a long time to keep a man believing his friend is dead. But, Reichenbach, Moriarty, we all saw you fall," Watson stammers, his mind struggling to reconcile the impossible with the evidence before his eyes. "How would you react, Detective, if someone you'd mourned for 3 years suddenly walked back into your life as if nothing had happened?" Holmes helps Watson to a chair and begins his explanation. "I never fell, Watson. Oh, Moriarty certainly plunged to his death, that much was necessary, but I merely made it appear that I'd fallen with him." The cool calculation in Holmes's voice reveals how carefully he'd planned every detail of his death. "When Moriarty and I reached the edge of that precipice, I knew one of us wouldn't leave alive," Holmes continues. "He attacked me with the fury of a cornered rat. We grappled at the edge, and for a moment I genuinely thought we'd both plunge over. But I know Baritsu, the Japanese wrestling system, and I managed to slip free just as he fell." Watson listens in stunned disbelief as Holmes describes hanging from the cliff face, watching Moriarty's body disappear into the foam below, then carefully climbing back up to safety. "But why not tell me you were alive? Why let me believe you were dead for 3 years? Holmes's expression becomes grave. "Because Moriarty was only the head of the organization, Watson. 3 of his most dangerous lieutenants survived: Colonel Sebastian Moran, the second most dangerous man in London, and others who would have hunted me relentlessly if they'd known I survived. So I traveled the world under assumed names, dismantling Moriarty's criminal network piece by piece. I spent 2 years in Tibet learning from the head lama. I visited Persia, looked in at Mecca, and conducted delicate research for the French government in Montpellier. All the while, Moriarty's remaining Confederates believed me dead, allowing me to work in safety. Think about the implications of this, Detective. Holmes sacrificed 3 years of his life, let his closest friend suffer grief and loss, all to ensure he could destroy an entire criminal empire without interference. Was this brilliant strategy or unforgivable cruelty? What would you have done in his position? But why return now? Watson asks, still processing the shock. What changed? Holmes's eyes gleam with the old hunting light. Because Colonel Moran has finally made his move. He murdered Ronald Adair, and in doing so, revealed himself as the last remaining piece of Moriarty's organization that needs removing. Holmes leads Watson to the window and points at the wax bust. "You see my dummy there? Moran is watching this building even now, waiting for a chance to kill me. He's learned somehow that I'm alive and young Adair's murder was meant to lure me out of hiding." "How does Adair's death connect to Moran?" Watson asks, his mind racing to keep up. Holmes explains. "Adair discovered that Moran was cheating at cards using a sophisticated signaling system. When Adair threatened to expose him, Moran silenced him permanently, using his famous airgun to shoot through the open window from the empty house across the street. The method becomes clear. That's why no gun was found in the locked room, because the shot came from outside through the window. The murderer was never in Adair's room at all. Moran fired from the abandoned house opposite, then disappeared into the night. But he made one crucial error. He left the window slightly open, which is what drew my attention to the possibility of an external shot. Does this solution satisfy your detective instincts?" The locked room wasn't locked at all. It was simply that we were looking for the wrong kind of entry point. The killer never needed to be inside the room. He only needed a clear line of sight through that one open window. Holmes positions himself carefully. And tonight Moran will attempt the same trick on me. He's in that empty house right now, his airgun trained on my silhouette in the window. At any moment he'll fire at what he believes is me, But what is actually that wax bust Mrs. Hudson helped me prepare? As if on cue, there's a sharp crack and the sound of breaking glass. The wax bust's head shatters into pieces, and Holmes moves with lightning speed. Now, Watson, we must act before he escapes. Together with Inspector Lestrade, who Holmes had positioned in waiting, they rush across the street and burst into the empty house. In the front room, they find Colonel Sebastian Moran frantically dismantling a peculiar weapon, an air gun of remarkable craftsmanship, silent and deadly. The tiger hunter-turned-assassin looks up with the eyes of a cornered predator. Holmes, but I saw you in the window. I know I didn't miss. You didn't miss, Colonel, Holmes replies with cold satisfaction. You hit your target perfectly. Unfortunately for you, your target was made of wax and plaster. You're under arrest for the murder of Ronald Adair and the attempted murder of Sherlock Holmes, who, as you can see, is very much alive. As Lestrade snaps the handcuffs on Moran's wrists, Holmes examines the air gun with professional appreciation. Quite the weapon, Watson. Silent, accurate at considerable range, fires a soft-nosed bullet that makes identification nearly impossible. Von Herder constructed this masterpiece for Moriarty, and Moran inherited it after the Falls. It's been used in several unsolved murders over the past 3 years. The case concludes with Moran's arrest and confession. Scotland Yard finally has the evidence to close multiple murder cases, and the last remnant of Moriarty's organization is behind bars. Justice has been served, though delayed by 3 long years of careful planning and patience. Back in the familiar sitting room at 221B, Watson pours 2 brandies with shaking hands. Holmes, you must understand. These 3 years have been absolute hell. I grieved for you, wrote your biography believing you were gone forever. How could you let me suffer like that? Holmes's response reveals both his genius and his fundamental difficulty with human emotions. My dear Watson, I apologize for the deception, but surely you see it was necessary. If even you had known I was alive, your behavior might have tipped off Moran or one of the others. Your genuine grief was the most convincing proof of my death. That's monstrously calculated, Holmes, Watson protests. But even as he says it, he recognizes the terrible logic. Sometimes the greatest detective work requires sacrifices that wound the soul as deeply as any bullet. Holmes sacrificed his friend's happiness for 3 years to ensure the complete destruction of a criminal empire. Besides, Holmes adds with a hint of his old sardonic humor, you did write some rather flattering things about me in those stories you published. I particularly enjoyed the one about the speckled band, though I must say you have a tendency to romanticize my methods somewhat excessively. Watson can't help but smile through his lingering shock and anger. Well, if you're going to fake your death and disappear for 3 years, the least I can do is make you sound heroic in print. Though I notice you're not complaining about the royalties I've been saving for you. The moment of levity passes, and Holmes becomes serious again. Watson, I know what I've put you through. If there had been any other way to ensure Moran's capture and the safety of everyone I care about, I would have taken it. But Moriarty's organization had eyes everywhere. One slip, one hint that I'd survived, and they would have gone to ground where I could never reach them. And what about now? Watson asks. Are we truly safe? Is it finally over? Holmes gazes out the window at the London streets below. Moriarty and Moran were the last of their kind, criminal geniuses who operated on a scale most people can't imagine. With them gone, ordinary criminals remain, but none with the vision and organization to threaten us in the same way, so we can return to our old life? Watson feels hope stirring for the first time in years. The consulting detective and his faithful biographer, solving London's mysteries one case at a time? Holmes turns from the window with a genuine smile. I can think of nothing I'd prefer more, old friend. Though I suspect you'll need to explain to your wife why you'll be spending so many evenings away from home. So tell me, detective, did you solve the locked room mystery before Holmes explained it? Could you have predicted that Holmes had faked his death, or were you as shocked as Watson? And most importantly, what does this case teach us about the price of justice, both for those who pursue it and those who love them? This remarkable return reminds us that in the world of Sherlock Holmes, death itself is merely another puzzle to be solved, another illusion to be penetrated by keen observation and logical deduction. The great detective's resurrection proves that as long as evil exists in organized forms, heroes will find ways to rise again and continue the eternal fight for justice. The empty house wasn't just the building where Moran hid to take his shot. It was the void in Watson's life, the absence that Holmes left behind, and the space that only true friendship could fill again. Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about who committed the crime, but about who we become when the people we depend on disappear from our lives. Join me next time as we investigate The Adventure of the Norwood Builder, where Holmes must save an innocent man from the gallows while exposing a villain who seems to have committed the perfect crime, framing his victim so thoroughly that even Scotland Yard is convinced of the man's guilt.